This story is titled, My Girlfriend Abandoned Her Niece on My Doorstep and Went on a Girls' Trip Without Telling Me. So I called her sister in child services and ended the relationship for good. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing. Alright, let's get started. Hi Reddit. You ever feel like life smacks you with a reality check you weren't asking for? That's where I found myself with my now ex-girlfriend, Lexi. For over a year, I thought I was dating someone who had her life together. Turns out she was a lot more self-centered than I ever realized. And let me tell you, I missed all the signs. I'm Jake, 33, and I met Lexi, 29, at a coffee shop about a year and a half ago. It was one of those cute, movie-like moments. She spilled her drink all over the counter, swore under her breath, and I handed her some napkins while cracking a joke about the baristas making drinks too aggressively. She laughed, and from there, we started talking. She had this effortless charm about her, like she didn't have to try to be the most interesting person in the room. I asked for her number that day, and we hit it off fast. Dates turned into weekends together. Weekends turned into spending most of our time at my place, and before I knew it, we were a couple. Lexi was fun, spontaneous, and the kind of person who could make any situation seem exciting. She always had a story, always had a joke, and always seemed to have this air of confidence that was contagious. But looking back now, there were cracks in that image, ones I completely ignored at the time. One of the first red flags I missed was how Lexi talked about her family. She had an older sister, Emma, who she described as a mess. Emma was a single mom to an 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and Lexi never missed a chance to complain about them. Anytime Emma needed help with Lily, Lexi would go on about how inconvenient it was. She treats me like her personal babysitter, Lexi would say, rolling her eyes. I have my own life, you know. At first, I didn't think much of it. Siblings vent about each other all the time, right? I figured Lexi was just blowing off steam and that it wasn't a big deal. But what stuck out to me was the way she talked about Lily. Most people, when they talk about kids, have at least a little softness in their voice. Not Lexi. She made it sound like Lily was some huge burden. She's not even that hard to handle, I remember saying once. Kids that age just want to play games and eat snacks? How bad could it be? Lexi scoffed. Yeah, but it's not my job, Jake. Emma chose to have a kid, not me. That response stuck with me. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to start a fight, but it felt cold. The way she dismissed her own niece like that rubbed me the wrong way, but I chalked it up to her being frustrated in the moment. The more I think about it, the more I realize how much Lexi liked to frame herself as the victim in every situation. If Emma needed help, Lexi would act like she was doing some massive charity work, like she was a saint for watching her niece for a couple of hours. She'd never admit it, but she loved playing the martyr. And because I didn't know Emma well, I only had Lexi's version of events to go off of. Lexi also had this habit of being vague about her plans. She'd tell me she was busy or had something to take care of, but she'd never go into detail. If I asked, she'd brush it off, like I was prying too much. At the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. She was an independent person, and I respected that. But now I realize she used that vagueness as a way to keep me in the dark about a lot of things. One of the few times I met Emma, I started to see cracks in Lexi's narrative. Emma seemed tired, sure, but she was nice and clearly loved her daughter. She thanked Lexi for helping out and even offered to pay for dinner, which felt weird considering how much Lexi complained about being taken advantage of. After we left, I said, Emma seems nice. I don't know why you make her out to be so difficult. Lexi shrugged. She's fine in small doses. You don't see what I see? I let it go, but looking back, it's clear Lexi was leaving out a lot of context. Another thing I should have picked up on was how Lexi handled responsibility in general. She hated being tied down to anything. If someone asked her to do something that didn't directly benefit her, she'd either find a way to get out of it or do the bare minimum. It was always about what was convenient for her. One time, a friend asked if she could pet sit for a weekend. Lexi agreed, but when the time came, she handed me the key and said, You're better at this kind of stuff. Can you check on their dog for me? At the time, I thought it was funny, like she was just being lazy. But now, I see it for what it was. She didn't want to deal with anything that took effort. That laziness bled into how she treated me, too. If we made plans, I was always the one organizing everything. If we had a disagreement, I was always the one who had to smooth things over. Lexi liked to act like she was easygoing, but really she just didn't want to put in the work. And yet, I kept making excuses for her. I told myself she was just busy or tired, or didn't realize how her behavior came across. I wanted to believe she was the fun, carefree person I'd fallen for, not the selfish, entitled person she really was. The truth is, I was blind to how one-sided our relationship become. I did everything I could to make things work, and Lexi took it all for granted. I didn't see it then, but she wasn't just inconsiderate. She was straight up manipulative. But all of that came to a head. One Friday afternoon, I walked up to my house, expecting nothing more than an empty living room and a peaceful weekend. Instead, I found an 8-year-old sitting on my front steps, holding a tiny pink suitcase and looking at me like I was supposed to have all the answers. "Lily?" I asked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She nodded, holding out a piece of paper like it was her ticket to a ride she wasn't sure she wanted. I took it, and there it was. My address scrawled in Lexi's unmistakable handwriting. "She said you'd take care of me this week," Lily said, her voice casual, like this was a normal drop-off arrangement. I stood there, stunned. Lexi never mentioned, not a word, not a text, nothing. My phone was in my pocket, so I yanked it out to check if maybe I missed something. Nope. No messages, no calls, no warning. Just her niece, sitting on my porch with a suitcase and a note. I crouched down to her level. "Hey, did your aunt say where she was going?" "She said she's going to see her friends," Lily replied, shrugging like it wasn't a big deal. "Friends? What friends? I didn't even know she had plans this weekend." I brought Lily inside, figuring we'd sort this out in a minute. I got her some juice and a granola bar, while my brain scrambled to process what was happening. I tried calling Lexi, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Okay, maybe she was driving or her phone was off. I left a message. "Hey, Lexi, you, left Lily here? Call me back, like immediately." I wasn't sure whether to be angry, confused, or both. Mostly, I was just trying to stay calm for Lily's sake. She was munching her granola bar like this was a totally normal Friday night, and I didn't want to stress her out. After a few minutes of pacing and no callback, I sent a text. "Why is Lily here? Where are you?" Nothing. I decided to ask Lily a few more questions, keeping my tone light so she wouldn't feel like she'd done anything wrong. "So, your mom's at work, right? And Aunt Lexi said she'd watch you?" "Yeah," Lily said. "She said she had to go see her friends, but you'd be fine watching me." "Fine? Watching her? Was this some kind of sick joke?" I opened the suitcase to see what Lexi had packed for her. Inside, there was one change of clothes, a stuffed animal, a half-empty pack of crayons, and a coloring book. That was it. No snacks, no pajamas, not even a toothbrush. It was like she'd packed in a hurry, barely thinking about what Lily might actually need for the weekend. This wasn't just inconsiderate, it was neglectful. How did she think this was okay? At that point, I was fuming. I called her again, straight to voicemail. Again. I tried texting her. "This is not okay. Call me ASAP." Nothing. I felt a mix of disbelief and fury. Who does this? Who drops a kid off at someone's house without asking first? And not just any kid, her niece. Lily was sitting on the couch, flipping through her coloring book, totally unaware of how furious I was. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that none of this was her fault. She didn't ask to be caught in the middle of her aunt's ridiculous stunt. I sat down next to her and said, "Hey, kiddo, how about we figure out dinner? Can we have chicken nuggets?" she asked, her face lighting up. "Sure thing," I said, forcing a smile. I threw some nuggets in the oven and tried to figure out my next move. I didn't have Emma's number, and I barely knew her. The only person who could fix this was Lexi, and she was completely unreachable. While the nuggets cooked, I tried to distract Lily with a movie. She picked some animated flick I'd never heard of, and I sat there pretending to watch while my mind raced. What if Lexi didn't come back tonight? What if she didn't come back tomorrow? How long was this girls' trip supposed to last? I couldn't just sit around and hope she'd show up. After dinner, I went through Lily's bag again, hoping to find some kind of clue. Maybe a note, an itinerary, something. Nothing. All I found was a little sticky note stuck to the inside of her coloring book with Lexi's scrawled handwriting. "Be good. Uncle Jake will take care of you." Uncle Jake? I wasn't her uncle. I was Lexi's boyfriend. And since when did I agree to this? The note felt like a slap in the face. Lexi hadn't even bothered to call or text me before making this decision. She just assumed I'd handle it. By bedtime, I was at my wit's end. I set up the guest room for Lily, made sure she had everything she needed, and tucked her in. She smiled and said, "Thanks, Uncle Jake," like this was all perfectly normal. As soon as she was asleep, I paced around the house, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Child services? Was this serious enough for that? It wasn't like Lily was in immediate danger. She was safe, fed, and sleeping in a warm bed. But this wasn't normal. I decided to give Lexi one last chance before escalating things. I sent her another text. "I spoke to Lily. I know you're on a trip. You need to call me right now. This is crazy." I stared at my phone, waiting for the little typing bubble to pop up. It didn't. No reply, no callback, nothing. At that point, I realized two things. First, Lexi wasn't going to call me back anytime soon. She dropped Lily off and clearly thought that was enough. Second, I was going to have to figure this out on my own. I made a mental note to call a mutual friend in the morning to see if they could help me track down Emma's number. If Lexi wasn't going to step up, I'd have to go straight to the source. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. All of it felt surreal. Lexi had always acted like she was so put together, like she had everything under control. But this was something else entirely. Something had to give, and I wasn't going to let Lexi's irresponsibility slide. Not this time. The next morning, I woke up still annoyed and confused. I checked my phone. No missed calls or texts from Lexi. At this point, I wasn't even surprised. I got up, made Lily some breakfast, and tried to focus on her instead of the mess Lexi had dumped on me. Lily was a sweet kid, totally unbothered by the chaos her aunt had caused. She chatted about her favorite shows while munching on her pancakes, and I nodded along, trying not to let my frustration show. Once breakfast was done, I set her up with some cartoons and started making calls. My first priority was to get in touch with Emma. I didn't have her number, but I figured someone in our circle might. I called a mutual friend, Sarah, and explained the situation. Wait, Lexi dropped her niece at your place without telling you? Sarah sounded as shocked as I felt. Yeah, I said. And now she's off on some girls' trip, completely unreachable. Do you have Emma's number? I need to let her know what's going on. Sarah paused for a moment before saying, I don't have her number, but I know someone who might. Let me text you in a bit. I thanked her and hung up, already feeling a little better. At least I was doing something to fix this. While I waited for Sarah's update, I started cleaning up the kitchen. That's when it hit me. I still didn't know where Lexi actually was. She'd told Lily she was visiting friends, but that was vague as hell. I grabbed my phone and decided to do some digging. I opened Instagram, and sure enough, there she was, posting stories like nothing was wrong. The first one was a selfie by a pool, captioned, "Finally some me time." The next was a boomerang of her clinking glasses with her friends, and the one after that was a group photo with the location tagged, Miami Beach Resort. I felt my blood boil. Lexi wasn't just hanging out with friends, she was living it up at a luxury resort while I was stuck babysitting a child she'd abandoned on my doorstep. And she didn't even seem to care. I kept scrolling through her posts, trying to piece together the timeline. She'd been bragging about this trip all week, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Now it all made sense. While I was working and planning for a quiet weekend, Lexi was packing her bags and plotting her escape. The more I scrolled, the angrier I got. It wasn't just the trip. It was the sheer audacity of it all. She hadn't asked me to help, hadn't even bothered to warn me. She just assumed I'd handle it, like I was some kind of backup plan. Then I noticed something else. In one of her photos, there was a receipt on the table, half covered by a drink. The name on the receipt wasn't hers. It was mine. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my wallet and checked my bank app. And sure enough, there it was. Multiple charges from the Miami Beach Resort. Flights, hotel, meals, and even a spa package, all on my credit card. I sat there, stunned, as the realization sank in. Lexi had stolen my card to fund her trip. She'd not only dumped her niece on me without asking, but she'd also used my money to pay for her getaway. At that moment, my frustration turned into full-blown rage. I wasn't just angry about the inconvenience anymore. I felt completely disrespected. Who does that to someone they're supposed to care about? I called my bank immediately and reported the charges as unauthorized. The customer service rep was helpful, walking me through the process of disputing the charges and canceling my card. By the end of the call, I felt a small sense of relief. At least Lexi wouldn't get to enjoy any more of my money. Sarah texted me shortly after, saying she'd found Emma's number through another friend. I called Emma immediately, and when she picked up, I wasted no time explaining what was going on. At first, she didn't believe me. Wait, Lexi left Lily with you? Why would she do that? She said you asked her to babysit while you were at work, I said. But instead of watching Lily, she dropped her at my house and took off for a trip. Emma was silent for a moment before saying, I don't understand. I paid her to watch Lily. Why would she leave her with you? That stopped me in my tracks. You paid her? Yeah, Emma said, her voice tight. I always pay her when she babysits. She made it clear she wouldn't do it otherwise. I didn't know what to say. Lexi had always acted like she was doing Emma a huge favor by watching Lily, but apparently she was getting paid for it. All those times she complained about being taken advantage of? Total lies. Emma apologized over and over, saying she never would have trusted Lexi if she'd known this would happen. She promised to fly home early and asked me to keep Lily safe until she got there. No problem, I said. I'll make sure she's okay. By the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been hit with a truck. Not only had Lexi lied to Emma, but she'd also lied to me about why she was helping her sister in the first place. It wasn't about family, it was about money. And when she couldn't be bothered to fulfill her end of the deal, she dumped Lily on me like I was her personal assistant. I sat down on the couch, staring at my phone, trying to process everything. Lexi had shown me exactly who she was, and it wasn't pretty. She was selfish, entitled, and completely irresponsible. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care. Lily looked up from her coloring book and smiled at me. Uncle Jake, can we go to the park later? Of course, I said, forcing a smile. At least one of us deserved a good day. After the park, we grabbed some takeout for lunch. While Lily was eating her nuggets and fries, I scrolled through Instagram again, half hoping to see Lexi's posts pop up with some kind of clue about when she'd be back. And there it was, a news story. Lexi was lounging by a pool, her sunglasses perched on her head, and the caption read, "Living my best life." I slammed my phone down on the table so hard that Lily looked up, startled. "Sorry, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile. "Just dropped my phone." She nodded and went back to her fries, but I couldn't focus. Lexi wasn't just ignoring me, she was flaunting the fact that she was having the time of her life while I was stuck cleaning up her mess. I tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail, just like it had the last dozen times. I left a message, and this time, I didn't hold back. "Lexi, you need to call me. Now this is not okay. I've been watching Lily for over a day without any explanation from you, and I know you're in Miami because you stole my credit card to pay for it. If I don't hear from you soon, we're done. Don't test me on this." I hung up and took a deep breath. I wasn't even sure if she'd listened to the voicemail, but at least I'd gotten my point across. Later that evening, while Lily was watching cartoons, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it, thinking it might finally be Lexi. Sure enough, it was her. The message was short and infuriating. "Relax, Jake. She's fine with you. Don't be so dramatic." Dramatic? Dramatic. I could feel my blood pressure spike as I stared at her text. She had the nerve to call me dramatic after everything she'd done? I fired back immediately. "This is not about being dramatic. You abandoned your niece without asking me, stole my credit card, and disappeared. This is unacceptable. You need to come back. Now." Her response came almost instantly. "Ugh, Jake, chill out. You're good with kids. It's just for a couple of days." At that point, I wasn't even mad anymore. I was furious. She wasn't just ignoring the problem, she was acting like it didn't even exist. I didn't bother replying. I needed to cool down before I said something I couldn't take back. Instead, I called Emma again to let her know what was going on. "She texted you that?" Emma said, her voice tight with anger. "I can't believe this. She's completely out of control. I'm flying home tomorrow, Jake. Just hang in there a little longer." I told her not to worry and that Lily was fine, which was true. Despite everything, Lily was still her cheerful self, drawing pictures and telling me stories about school. She had no idea the adults in her life were completely losing it. The next day, while I was making breakfast, I got another message from Lexi. This time, it wasn't just her brushing me off. It was an accusation. "You're seriously ruining my trip. I trusted you to handle this, and now you're acting like a child. Grow up, Jake." That was it. I wasn't going to let her twist this around and make me the bad guy. I called her, and this time, she actually picked up. "Finally," I said, my voice sharp. "What the hell is wrong with you, Lexi?" She sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're so dramatic, Jake. I trusted you because you're good with kids. This isn't a big deal. You're just overreacting." I was so mad I could barely think straight. "You know what? Don't bother coming back here. We're done. I've had enough of your selfish crap." "Jake, don't be stupid," she said, her voice rising. "You're going to break up with me over this? Seriously? You're such a—" I hung up before she could finish. I wasn't going to sit there and let her insult me after everything she'd pulled. After the call, I blocked her number. I was done letting her push me around and make me feel like I was the crazy one. When Emma's flight landed later that evening, she came straight to my house to pick up Lily. I told her everything that had happened. Emma was livid. "She's going to pay for this," she said, holding Lily close. "I'll make sure of it." After they left, I thought things might finally start to settle down, but I was wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The chaos Lexi unleashed didn't end the moment I kicked her out of my life. In fact, that's when the fallout truly began. I started by following up with my bank. The customer service rep I spoke to had been great about disputing the charges when I first called, but now they wanted more details for their investigation. I forwarded them screenshots of Lexi's Instagram posts, showing her tagged at the Miami Beach resort, along with copies of my bank statements highlighting the unauthorized charges. "We'll escalate this to our fraud department," the rep told me. "If the charges were made without your authorization, we'll flag them and notify the proper authorities." Hearing that felt like a small victory. Lexi thought she could get away with using my money for her selfish trip, but now it was going on record as fraud. The next call I made was to the Miami Beach resort. I explained the situation to their customer service team, letting them know the charges were disputed because Lexi had used my card without permission. The woman on the other end sounded appalled. "I see the reservations," she said. "It looks like 2 nights were already completed, but the remaining nights have been canceled." "Great," I said. "And what happens now?" "Well," she continued, "since the payment is under investigation and flagged as unauthorized, her account here will also be flagged for fraud. She won't be able to book with us in the future. That was the icing on the cake. Lexi loved flaunting her luxury trips, and now one of her go-to spots was banning her. It wasn't going to undo the damage she'd done, but it was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Emma and I stayed in close contact. She was furious and laser-focused on making sure Lexi couldn't pull a stunt like this again. I filed the CPS report, Emma told me during one of our calls. I explained everything, how Lexi agreed to babysit Lily, then abandoned her at your house without asking, and how you had to step in to make sure she was safe. Good, I said. What else can I do to help? They might ask for a statement from you, she said. Having your perspective as someone who was directly impacted will strengthen the case. It didn't take long for CPS to reach out. They wanted me to give a full account of what had happened, and I didn't hold back. I told them how I found Lily on my doorstep, how Lexi ignored my calls and texts for days, and how she left Lily with barely enough supplies for a weekend. She didn't even bother to confirm I was home, I told the caseworker. If I'd been out of town, Lily would have been stranded. The caseworker was taking notes the entire time, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Then they asked about the credit card situation, and I explained how Lexi had used my card to book her trip. I sent them copies of my dispute with the bank and screenshots of Lexi's social media posts, which made it painfully obvious she was living it up on stolen money. This is very concerning, the caseworker said. Thank you for providing these details. We'll follow up with Ms. Lexi as part of our investigation. Hearing that gave me a sense of validation. Lexi couldn't spin this into some harmless misunderstanding when the evidence was piling up against her. Emma wasn't stopping with CPS either. She'd also hired a lawyer to explore legal options, including pressing charges for reckless endangerment. When she called to update me, I could hear the frustration in her voice. I trusted her, Jake, Emma said. I thought she'd finally stepped up and wanted to help with Lily, but she only cared about herself. I'm done giving her the benefit of the doubt. Same here, I said. She's been acting like none of this matters, but she's about to get a reality check. Emma's lawyer was building a strong case, and the evidence I'd provided was a big part of it. Between the CPS investigation, the flagged charges at the resort, and my bank's fraud inquiry, Lexi was getting hit from all sides. But of course, Lexi wasn't going down without a fight. She started messaging mutual friends, spinning her own version of events to make herself look like the victim. According to her, I was overreacting and ruining her life over what she claimed was just a misunderstanding. A few friends reached out to ask what was going on, and I didn't hold back. I sent them the same screenshots I'd sent to CPS. It didn't take long for the truth to spread. One friend, Sarah, summed it up perfectly. Yeah, she's screwed. Nobody's buying her story anymore. Then, one evening, Lexi showed up at my house unannounced. I heard the pounding on my door and knew exactly who it was before I even looked through the peephole. What do you want, Lexi? I said, opening the door just enough to keep her from barging in. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're ruining my life over one mistake. You didn't have to call CPS, Jake. You didn't have to cancel my trip. Her tone was somewhere between anger and desperation, but I wasn't buying it. One mistake? You dumped your niece at my house without asking, stole my credit card, and disappeared for days. That's not a mistake, Lexi. That's a pattern of selfishness. She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. She's fine, isn't she? You're acting like I abandoned her in the middle of nowhere. She was safe with you. That's not the point, I said, my voice rising. Lexi started to argue, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. We're done, Lexi. You need to leave. She shouted something about me being petty and vindictive as she stormed off, but I didn't care. Let her throw a tantrum. It didn't change the fact that she'd burned every bridge she had. By the end of the week, the fallout was impossible for Lexi to ignore. CPS was fully involved. Her bank account was flagged for fraud at the resort, and Emma's lawyer was preparing to press charges. Even her family was furious with her. Emma told me their mom had called to apologize for Lexi's behavior, saying, she's going to have to learn the hard way. After weeks of chaos, the storm that Lexi unleashed on my life finally started to calm down, but not before she got a front row seat to the consequences of her own selfishness. Watching her downfall was like watching someone trip over their own mess, and honestly, it felt damn satisfying. Let me set the stage. CPS had launched their investigation, the Miami Beach resort flagged her for fraud, my bank was moving forward with its inquiry, and Emma's lawyer was gearing up to press charges. Every door Lexi tried to escape through slammed shut, and she was finally realizing she couldn't charm or lie her way out of this one. But of course, Lexi didn't go quietly. Even as everything fell apart around her, she tried to shift the blame onto anyone but herself. She posted this long, melodramatic rant on social media about how she was being targeted by people who didn't understand her situation. Everyone needs to calm down, she wrote, because this is all a misunderstanding. I trusted the wrong people and now I'm paying for it. It's so unfair. Unfair? That word hit me like a slap. Lexi thought it was unfair that she was being held accountable for abandoning her and stealing my money. She had some nerve. The comments on her post were divided. A few people who didn't know the full story chimed in with sympathy, saying things like, "Stay strong, girl," and "haters gonna hate." But most of the responses weren't so kind. One person wrote, "Didn't you leave your niece with your ex and run off to Miami? That's not a misunderstanding. That's trashy." Another said, "Maybe you should take responsibility for once, instead of blaming everyone else. Just a thought." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Lexi was burying herself with every word she posted. Meanwhile, Emma and I kept in touch as things progressed. CPS didn't mess around. They interviewed Lexi, and according to Emma, it didn't go well for her. She tried to play it off like she didn't know it was a big deal, Emma told me during one of our calls. But the caseworker wasn't buying it. They told her straight up that abandoning Lily like that was neglect, and they're recommending mandatory counseling if she wants to stay in her life. Hearing that made my day. Lexi had spent so long acting like she could do whatever she wanted, but now she was finally being forced to face reality. But it didn't stop there. Emma's lawyer was relentless, gathering evidence and building a case for reckless endangerment. Lexi's careless actions had put Lily in a vulnerable position, and that wasn't something Emma or the law was going to overlook. And then there was the financial side of things. My bank officially ruled the charges Lexi made on my credit card as fraud, and they refunded every cent. The Miami Beach resort? They blacklisted her completely, and I heard through the grapevine that they'd flagged her name in their system so she couldn't even try to book under a different card. She'd burned bridges with everyone. Her family wasn't speaking to her. Her friends were distancing themselves, and she was basically persona non grata in every circle she used to move in. One of the most satisfying moments came when Emma updated me about her lawyer's next steps. Emma's lawyer filed the paperwork, and the case moved forward. Lexi tried to play the victim, but the evidence was overwhelming. All of it painted a clear picture of someone who cared more about themselves than anyone else. I didn't have to testify in court, but I was ready to, if it came to that. The thought of Lexi squirming under questioning was enough to put a smile on my face. In the end, the court ruled in Emma's favor. Lexi was ordered to attend mandatory counseling, pay a hefty fine, and complete a parenting class if she wanted to have any future involvement in Lily's life. The reckless endangerment charges didn't lead to jail time, but they were enough to leave a permanent mark on her record. Emma told me that Lexi broke down in tears when the judge handed down the decision, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had every chance to do the right thing and fix her mistakes, but instead she doubled down and tried to play the victim. As for me, life has been a lot quieter since I cut Lexi out. Sure, there were some awkward moments when mutual friends tried to drag me into the drama, but most people saw through her BS. "Jake, I had no idea she was like that," one friend said after I showed them the screenshots. "You dodged a bullet, man." And they were right. Losing Lexi was the best thing that could have happened to me. I'm still in touch with Emma and Lily. In fact, I recently went to one of Lily's soccer games. She ran up to me afterward, grinning ear to ear, and said, "Uncle Jake, did you see my goal?" I laughed and said, "Of course I did. You crushed it out there." Moments like that remind me why I stood my ground. Lily deserves better than someone like Lexi, and Emma is doing everything she can to make sure she gets it. As for Lexi, she's been radio silent since the court ruling. Last I heard, she moved back in with her parents and was trying to get her life together. Part of me wonders if she's actually learned anything, but honestly, it doesn't matter. She's out of my life, and that's what counts. Looking back, I'm proud of how I handled everything. I could have let Lexi manipulate me into letting it slide, but instead, I stood up for myself and for Lily. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Lexi thought she could dump her problems on me and walk away without a scratch. Instead, she lost her vacation, her family's trust, her reputation, and me. And you know what? She deserved it. This story is titled, "My Family Stole the Business I Started, but Karma Hit Them Hard. Now they're asking for my help." Guys, before we start the video, I just saw something crazy. 82% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you're already here enjoying the content, why not hit that subscribe button? It's completely free, takes just a second, and it really helps the channel grow so I can keep bringing you more stories you love. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "Alright, so here's how this all started. My family has always been about business. But let's be clear, they've never owned anything. They've spent their lives working under someone else, clocking in, and thinking they're living the dream because they got a decent paycheck and a pat on the back at the company Christmas party. My dad, corporate lifer. My uncle, same boat, just a fancier job title. And my brother? He wasn't anything special either, just another cog in the machine. Me, though? I wasn't about to waste my life like that. I wanted something more. So after slogging through some soul-sucking jobs to save up cash, I decided to start my own thing, a startup. I had a solid idea, but what I didn't have was enough money. That's when I turned to my family. I sat them down and pitched my business idea like I was on Shark Tank. I told them, if you guys help me get investors, I'll give you stakes in the company. Simple, right? They weren't exactly doing me a favor. They were getting a piece of the pie if it worked out. To my surprise, they actually came through. I mean, I didn't think they'd take me seriously at first. My dad's the kind of guy who thinks entrepreneurship is just a fancy way of saying unemployed. But they pulled some strings, called up a few people they knew, and boom, I had investors. Not just any investors either. These were the real deal. People with money and connections. I was floored. For once, I felt like my family actually believed in me. And they didn't just stop at finding investors. They started getting involved in the business itself, tossing around ideas, offering advice, and even helping with some of the grunt work. I thought it was great at the time. I was like, wow, my family actually has my back. I didn't see it for what it really was, the beginning of them worming their way into something they didn't build. Anyway, I busted my ass getting this company off the ground. Late nights, early mornings, skipped meals. It was a grind like nothing I'd ever experienced before. But it paid off. By the second year, my startup blew up. I'm talking real success, enough money to make my head spin. We were making deals left and right, and I finally felt like all my hard work was paying off. That's when my family started showing up more. At first, I didn't think much of it. My dad and uncle quit their jobs to work with me full time, and my brother did the same. I thought it was awesome. I mean, who wouldn't want their family involved in something so personal and important? My dad would show up to meetings, pretending he was the big boss, even though he didn't understand half the stuff we were discussing. My uncle started acting like he was some kind of business guru because he had a background in finance. And my brother? That dude didn't know shit about running a company, but he strutted around the office like he was Elon Musk or something. Looking back, there were so many red flags I should have seen, but I didn't. I was too caught up in the success to notice. I mean, how could I complain? My company was thriving, and my family was finally coming together. My brother and I, who used to fight like cats and dogs over the dumbest stuff, were actually getting along. We weren't arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash, or who mom loved more. We were working together. It felt like my business had healed all the old wounds between us. I was proud. Hell, I thought this was what success was supposed to feel like. But man, was I wrong. So damn wrong. I think back to all the little things I ignored, like how my family kept telling me to watch my back around my friends and employees. They'd say shit like, "You never know who's just trying to use you," or "Be careful with your girlfriend. She might just be here for the money." At the time, I thought they were looking out for me. I mean, who wouldn't trust their own family? But now I realize they were planting seeds. They wanted me to think that the only people I could trust were them. And the worst part? I fell for it. At the time, I wasn't even that rich. Sure, I was doing well, but I wasn't rolling in cash like some billionaire. My friends and employees weren't out to screw me over. They were just doing their jobs and living their lives. But my family? They were slowly positioning themselves, making sure I leaned on them for everything. The first real crack in the facade came during the pandemic. Everything went remote, and we started doing meetings online. That's when the power plays started. Suddenly, my ideas weren't good enough anymore. The same ideas that built the company were now being shot down left and right. My dad and uncle would gang up on me during meetings, and my brother would sit there like a smug little asshole nodding along with whatever they said. They'd suggest their own half-baked ideas, acting like they were the saviors of the company. It was exhausting. I went from loving my job to dreading it. The company I built, the place that gave me a sense of purpose, was turning into a source of anxiety and stress. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it. My family wasn't just employees. They were part owners now. They had stakes in the company, and they weren't afraid to use that power against me. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking, it's just a rough patch. We'll get through it. But deep down, I think I knew things were starting to go downhill. My family wasn't here to help me. They were here to take over, and I was too blind to see it. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid I was. The signs were all there, glaringly obvious, but I ignored every single one of them because I was too wrapped up in the idea of having my family by my side. I thought, this is great. We're a team now. Yeah, a team of backstabbing assholes waiting for the perfect moment to screw me over. It started small, like most betrayals do. During our online meetings, they'd interrupt me mid-sentence to offer their perspective. My dad would say stuff like, "I don't think that's the right direction for the company," as if he had a clue what the right direction even was. My uncle, Mr. Finance Genius, would constantly throw out buzzwords he barely understood. And my brother? That smug little shit would just sit there, nodding along like their hype man, occasionally chiming in with, "Yeah, I agree with Dad." At first, I thought they were just being overly enthusiastic. I mean, they were new to this level of business, so I figured they were trying to find their footing. But the interruptions turned into challenges, and the challenges turned into outright dismissals. The ideas I brought to the table, the same ideas that had gotten the company off the ground, were suddenly outdated or not innovative enough. It wasn't just during meetings either. My brother started taking credit for stuff he had no hand in. We landed a big client, one I had been working on for months, and somehow he spun it like he was the one who made it happen. I let it slide because I didn't want to rock the boat. "It's just a small thing," I told myself. "It's not worth the fight." But those small things started piling up. Then there were the constant family meetings. They'd corner me after work or during lunch breaks to talk about how we should be running the company. My dad had this habit of saying, "You need to start thinking about the big picture," as if I hadn't been the one with the big picture to begin with. My uncle kept bringing up these ridiculous cost-cutting measures that would have gutted the team. And my brother? He just parroted whatever they said, pretending he was this brilliant strategist when he couldn't strategize his way out of a paper bag. One time, during one of these so-called meetings, my dad told me, "You're too close to this. You need to let other people take the reins." I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. But now I realize it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a warning. They weren't here to help me run the company. They were here to take it from me. The breaking point, though, came during the pandemic. I think being stuck at home gave them too much time to scheme. We had to make some tough decisions. Cutting costs, shifting priorities, that sort of thing. It was stressful as hell, but I was doing my best to steer the ship. That's when the mutiny started. During one of our online meetings, I brought up a plan to pivot some of our operations to adapt to the lockdowns. It was a solid idea, something I had put a lot of thought into. But before I could even finish explaining, my dad cut me off. "I don't think that's going to work," he said, like he was the CEO or something. My uncle jumped in, agreeing with him, and my brother, because of course, sided with them. They proposed their own plan, which was basically just rehashing what we were already doing, but with fancier words. I tried to push back, but they steamrolled me. They had the majority vote, so their shitty plan got approved, and mine got tossed aside. That meeting was the first time I felt like an outsider in my own company. I couldn't even recognize the business I had built. These people, my own family, were turning it into things got worse from there. My brother, who had no clue how to manage anything, started acting like he was running the show. He'd send out emails to the team, signing off as if he were the CEO, and even started making decisions without consulting me. When I confronted him about it, he brushed it off. "I'm just taking initiative," he said, like I should be proud of him. My dad and uncle weren't any better. They started holding meetings without me, making decisions behind my back. When I found out, they acted like it was no big deal. "We didn't want to bother you," my dad said, as if I wasn't the one who created this damn company in the first place. I tried to push back, but it was like talking to a brick wall. They had me outnumbered, and they knew it. Every time I brought up an issue, they'd gang up on me, making me feel like I was the problem. "You're being too emotional," my uncle would say, like I wasn't allowed to care about the business I built from the ground up. And my brother? That little shit had the nerve to tell me, "Maybe you should take a step back and let us handle things for a while." The audacity of that guy still pisses me off when I think about it. By the time we hit the midpoint of the lockdowns, I was miserable. My anxiety was through the roof, and I was having panic attacks before meetings. The company I once loved felt like a prison, and my family were the wardens. I knew something had to give, but I wasn't ready to admit just how bad things had gotten. It wasn't until later that I realized what they were doing. They weren't just undermining me. They were setting the stage to push me out entirely. And like an idiot, I let them. The whole situation turned into something straight out of a bad drama series. Except it was my life. The writing was on the wall for a while, but I was too wrapped up in trying to fix things to see what was coming. It all started with a mid-year meeting. I came into the meeting prepared, thinking it would be a tough but straightforward discussion. I should have known better. Right out of the gate, my uncle, in all his smug glory, suggested that maybe I should be on the chopping block. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, who says that to the person who built the company from scratch? But nope, he was dead serious. He started talking about how my brother had stepped up during the pandemic and was now handling most of the responsibilities. According to him, It only made sense for my brother to officially take over my role. I was floored. My brother taking over my role? The same guy who thought profit margins were something you color-coded on a spreadsheet? The same guy who once confused gross revenue with net profit during a client presentation? You've got to be kidding me. Before I could even process what was happening, my dad chimed in. He had the audacity to suggest that I either step down voluntarily or accept a demotion. A demotion. In my own company. He said it with this fake-ass tone like he was doing me a favor. Like he was being the reasonable one in the room. We just think it's for the best, he said, as if I was some intern who had screwed up too many coffee orders. I looked around the virtual meeting, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend me. But no. My uncle nodded along like a bobblehead, and my brother, that little snake didn't even have the guts to make eye contact with the camera. He just stared at his desk, probably hoping I wouldn't call him out. I tried to argue, but they shut me down so fast it was like they'd rehearsed it. My dad started talking about how business is business, and how I needed to separate my emotions from the company's needs. My uncle backed him up, throwing in some bullshit about the greater good, and how my brother was the natural leader now. The whole thing was a setup, and I walked right into it. They voted me out, just like that. My own family voted me out of my company. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to figure out how the hell I'd let it get to this point. These were the people I trusted most in the world, and they stabbed me in the back without so much as a second thought. The rest of the meeting was a blur. They moved on like nothing had happened, talking about next steps and assigning responsibilities. My responsibilities to my brother. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I logged off without saying a word. What could I say? Anything I wanted to scream at them would have just made me look even worse. After the meeting, I sat in my office for hours, staring at the wall. I couldn't believe it. My family, my own flesh and blood, had just kicked me out of the company I built with my blood, sweat, and tears. I felt like an idiot for ever trusting them. All those late nights, all the sacrifices, all the times I went above and beyond to make sure the company succeeded, it didn't mean shit to them. They saw an opportunity to take over, and they took it. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to fight back, to lawyer up and sue their asses into oblivion. But the other part of me, the part that was tired, broken, and just plain done, wanted to walk away. The thought of going back to that toxic environment made my skin crawl. I knew I wouldn't survive another day in that hellhole. In the end, I chose to resign. Maybe it was the coward's way out, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it was tearing me apart inside. So I wrote up my resignation letter, sent it off, and that was that. I was officially out. Leaving the company was like ripping off a scab that hadn't fully healed. It stung like hell, but there was a strange sense of relief too. I was free from the backstabbing and manipulation, but I was also out on my own with nothing but my savings and a bruised ego. It wasn't exactly a movie moment where the hero walks off into the sunset with a triumphant grin. No, it was more like walking into a storm, clutching a broken umbrella, and hoping to make it out alive. The first few months after resigning were rough. I had to move out of my cushy apartment and into a much smaller place to cut costs. Selling my car was next, which felt like another punch to the gut. That car was one of the few luxuries I'd allowed myself after years of grinding. But it had to go. My pride wasn't going to pay the bills. Starting over wasn't just about finances, though. It was about finding a way to rebuild my confidence. I spent weeks spiraling, questioning everything. Was I even capable of building another business? Or was my family right? Was I just lucky the first time? I hated that their voices were still in my head, even after I'd cut them out of my life. Eventually, I got tired of feeling sorry for myself. One morning, I woke up, looked around my tiny apartment, and thought, this isn't it. This can't be where my story ends. That's when I decided to stop sulking and start working. I didn't know what the hell my next move was going to be, but I knew I had to make one. I started brainstorming ideas for a new business, something completely different from what I'd done before. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old company or the people who ruined it for me. It had to be mine, something I could pour myself into without anyone else's fingerprints on it. The first few ideas were trash, half-baked concepts that wouldn't have made it past the planning phase. But eventually, I landed on something that felt right. I won't get into the specifics, but let's just say it was an industry I was passionate about and one I knew I could excel in. The problem? I didn't have the kind of cash I had when I started my first company. Back then, I had investors and family support. Now it was just me, my savings, and a few favors I could call in. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. No one else was pulling the strings. It was just me. Building the new business was a grind, even harder than the first time. I was working 12 to 14-hour days, juggling a million tasks at once. Some days, I didn't even know if I'd have enough money to make it to the next week. I lived off ramen and instant coffee, the kind of diet that screams broke entrepreneur. But I didn't care. Every small step forward felt like a victory. The loneliness was the hardest part. My family was gone, blocked on every platform I could think of. They didn't deserve access to my life anymore. I cut ties with anyone who even remotely reminded me of them, which meant my social circle got a lot smaller. The only person who stuck around was my wife. She was my rock, the one person who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. If it weren't for her, I don't think I would have made it through those first few months. About a year in, things finally started turning around. The new business began to take shape, and by some miracle, it started generating revenue. It wasn't much at first, just enough to keep the lights on, but it was a start, and that was all I needed. A small glimmer of hope to keep me going. By the second year, the business was thriving. It wasn't just doing well, it was doing better than my first company ever had. I finally felt like I was back on solid ground. And the best part? This time, I was surrounded by people I trusted. No family drama, no bullshit, just a tight-knit team of people who believed in the vision as much as I did. Cutting off my family was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, but it was also the most freeing. I didn't just block their numbers, I erased them from my life completely. My dad, my uncle, my brother, they were dead to me. Not literally, obviously, but you get the point. These were people who had no problem screwing me over when it suited them, and I wasn't about to let them back in, just because things were finally going well for me. At first, I didn't even think about them. I was so focused on rebuilding my life that they didn't cross my mind. But every now and then, a memory would creep in. A moment from before things went to hell. I'd remember the good times, like when my brother and I used to play video games together, or when my dad gave me advice about life. Those memories made it harder to stay angry, but then I'd remind myself of what they did. They didn't just betray me. They betrayed everything we were supposed to stand for as a family. And that's not something you just forgive and forget. Then came the shocker. I found out my old company was tanking. A mutual friend who used to work there gave me the rundown. After I left, my family basically stopped giving a shit. My dad, my uncle, and my brother treated it like their personal ATM, draining money to buy luxury cars and other crap they didn't need. Meanwhile, they let the actual business fall apart. Employees started leaving in droves, clients jumped ship, and the company that I built from nothing was circling the drain. Hearing that pissed me off more than I thought it would. I'd worked my ass off to make that company a success, and they destroyed it in less than 2 years. Part of me wanted to gloat, to laugh at their failure, but another part of me just felt sad. Not for them, obviously. They deserved whatever was coming to them. But for the company, it didn't deserve to go down like that. By the time I heard about their mess, I was already too far gone emotionally to care. My focus was on my new business, my new life, and the people who actually gave a damn about me. As far as I was concerned, my family could sink with the ship they'd stolen from me. I was finally in a good place. My new business was thriving. My personal life felt stable, and I'd moved on. Or at least I thought I had. But of course, life has a way of dragging you back into the mess you thought you'd escaped. And, surprise, surprise, the mess came in the form of my brother. It all started when I was reviewing resumes for a senior position in my company. I'd worked my ass off to build a solid team, and now we were growing fast enough to start filling higher-level roles. I was scrolling through the shortlisted candidates when I saw his name, my brother. Seeing his name on that list was like getting sucker punched. My first reaction was to laugh. Like, what the hell was this guy doing applying for a job? Didn't he still have my old company to play pretend CEO with? But the more I thought about it, the more curious I got. Something didn't add up. There was no way he'd be applying for a job unless things had really gone to shit. I decided to schedule the interview, not because I wanted to hire him, but because I needed answers. The day of the interview, he walked into my office looking like a ghost of his former self. He'd aged at least 10 years in the span of 2. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had this defeated look on his face like life had beaten him into submission. For a second, just a second, I felt bad for him. But then I remembered everything he did to me, and any sympathy I had disappeared. He froze when he saw me sitting behind the desk. His jaw tightened, and I could see the panic in his eyes, but he tried to play it cool. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know this was your company." "Small world," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Let's get started, shall we?" The interview was awkward, painfully so. He stumbled over basic questions and gave vague, half-assed answers about his experience. It was obvious he wasn't qualified for the job, not even close. But I let him dig his own grave. I stayed professional, taking notes and nodding along, even though my brain was screaming, "Are you serious right now?" By the time we wrapped up, I'd made up my mind. There was no way in hell I was hiring him. As he stood to leave, I hit him with the same line he'd thrown at me during that fateful meeting years ago. "I think your contributions would be better suited to a lower-level role. You might want to consider applying for something more appropriate." The look on his face was priceless. He went from shocked to pissed in about 2 seconds flat. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped. "This is unprofessional as hell. You're letting your personal feelings cloud your judgment." I leaned back in my chair, trying not to laugh. "You're free to leave if you don't like it," I said, echoing his own words from all those years ago. And just like that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I thought that was the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. Within hours, my phone started blowing up. Texts, calls, voicemails, all from my family. My dad accused me of sabotaging my brother's career out of spite. My uncle went on a rant about how I was disrespecting the family. Even my mom, who had been mostly silent throughout this whole ordeal, chimed in, begging me to be the bigger person and give my brother another chance. The cherry on top? My wife. She'd always been supportive of me, but even she started questioning my decision. "Maybe you should reconsider," she said one night. "He has a family to support. Kids, Michael. Think about the kids." I wanted to scream. Why was everyone acting like this was my problem? My brother had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. He didn't care about me when he was voting me out of my own company. So why the hell should I care about him now? But the guilt started creeping in, as much as I hated to admit it. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in my office, looking like a broken man. Was I being petty? Was I letting my anger get the best of me? I didn't know anymore. A few days later, I got a call from a mutual friend who used to work at my old company. He filled in the blanks for me, and holy shit, it was worse than I thought. Apparently, after I left, my family treated the business like their personal piggy bank. They bought luxury cars, threw lavish parties, and basically acted like royalty. Meanwhile, the actual business was falling apart. Clients were leaving, employees were quitting, and the company was hemorrhaging money. By the time the pandemic ended, it was a complete disaster. They thought the company would run itself, my friend said. They didn't realize how much work you were actually doing. Hearing that felt like a twisted kind of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My family had been riding my coattails all along. Without me, they were nothing. But the validation didn't make the situation any less messy. Now I had a decision to make. Part of me wanted to swoop in and buy the company back. It was still salvageable, according to my friend, but only if it was under new management. And by new management, I mean anyone but my dad, uncle, or brother. I'd have to cut them out completely, which wouldn't be easy. They'd fight me every step of the way, but honestly, I was ready for it. The other part of me wanted to walk away. Let them burn. They made their bed, and now they could deal with the consequences. Why should I step in and save them from their own stupidity? In the end, I decided to meet with them. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted closure. I needed to tell them, face to face, that they were out and I was taking back what was mine. No more games, no more manipulation. Just the cold, hard truth. When I walked into that meeting, they looked desperate. My dad tried to play it cool, but I could see the panic in his eyes. My uncle was fidgeting, and my brother wouldn't even look at me. They knew they were screwed. "I'll buy the company," I said, cutting straight to the point. "But under one condition. You're all out. No stakes, no positions, nothing. You walk away with the cash, and that's it." They argued, of course. My dad said it was unfair. My uncle claimed he deserved a role. And my brother, well, he just sat there sulking. But in the end, they caved. They needed the money more than they needed the pride. Walking out of that meeting felt damn good. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd won. I took back what was mine, and I did it on my terms. My family can keep their guilt trips and their sob stories. I'm done with them.